it appears, I'm not sure if there's a stalemate going on with Iran. It appears that Trump, I guess, wanted an easy victory or a short war, but the Iranians appear to have essentially threatened with yeah, a massive retaliation against any attack, which makes it very difficult for asserting any escalation control. That is, decide when the war should start, how it should be fought, when it should end. But how does this affect the wider, I guess, strategic picture here? To what extent would, for example, Russia and China involve themselves, or probably already involved themselves to some extent?
I think we have to understand something. The Mossad, CIA, MI6 triumvirate was successful in persuading President Trump a few weeks ago that Iran was on the verge of falling apart, disintegrating, all based on what they claimed was this concerted effort inside the country to overthrow the government. In reality, the protests that began were quite legitimate. They were not violent, and they weren't aimed at overthrowing anyone. These were large numbers of people who are extremely upset over the state of the Iranian economy, for which we in the United States are mightily responsible. Their currency was being systematically destroyed, and they all are aware of that. And that was the foundation for the protests. They were not necessarily aimed at regime change. Then the Mossad, with support from MI6 and CIA, introduced themselves into the equation. And we don't need to go back over the 40,000 Starlight terminals that were smuggled into the country and the Mossad agents who were operating within the crowds and providing money as well as weapons to people and urging them to shoot at police and kill members of the government and so forth. All of that was thanks to Russian and Chinese assistance, very, very rapidly suppressed and eliminated, frankly. The 40,000 Starlight terminals were shut down, and the Russians and the Chinese both helped in identifying where they were, and that helped the Iranians to eliminate that threat. But the people that went in to tell Donald Trump that Iran was weak and vulnerable and easy to essentially overthrow are still there. And what they then went back to President Trump and said, well, our attempt to overthrow the government surreptitiously utilizing intelligence forces failed. So his answer was, well, what's the next step? And the question was a legitimate one, and he got an answer. And the answer was provided both by the intelligence as well as by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. We don't have enough firepower. We don't have enough force on hand to affect anything inside Iran. The reason nothing has happened thus far is because we're still waiting for additional assets to show up. There are probably at least two more carrier battle groups on their way to the region. Now, one may be in the Mediterranean. I don't know. Another one will certainly be down in the Indian Ocean. But I also don't know what's going on in the Air Force side of the house. We have to remember that the real power behind the strikes on Iran won't come from the fleet at sea. It will come from the United States Air Force. They will deliver presumably from high altitude, out of range of Iranian air and missile defense capabilities, enormous firepower in the form of glide bombs, precision strike weapons, and so forth. So these talks that have now been convened, I think, are meaningless. I don't think the Iranians are terribly fooled. They're showing up because the Chinese and the Russians said, go to the talks, listen to what they have to say. But they've also made it very clear right up front that Mr. Netanyahu's talking points, which form the basis of President Trump's demand, 2 out of those 3 talking points have been dismissed out of hand. And that is any change or dismantlement or restructuring of the missile arsenal so that Israel need not worry about being within range of Iranian weapons. That's off the table. And the notion that Iran will then stop supporting or working with its allies in the region, that's off the table. So the only thing they're willing to talk about, apparently, is enriched uranium. Now, how far can that reach? I'm not sure it can get very far, because if you start talking about levels of enrichment and storage issues and where it's going to be, you're on the road back to the GCPOA that was there under the Obama administration. So I don't think these talks are serious at all. I think they're buying time. So I wouldn't expect anything to happen for another week, maybe 2 weeks, but certainly not for at least another week or 10 days because more assets are required. Now that brings us to the next question, which is most important. What's the objective of the probable air and missile campaign, which will start in another week to 10 days? Is it regime change? Is that where are we back to that? Or is there something else? Well, I think that you're still going to have a concerted effort to identify, find, target, and destroy the government if it can be done. But I think this is about destroying Iran. People need to understand that. This is a ruthless war of destruction that is designed to promote the disintegration of the Iranian nation state. They think they can do this. I don't know. I have my doubts. I mean, this is, after all, a nation of 93 million. The area is the size of Western Europe, but of course, the areas of greatest interest are still largely in the north and the central part of the country. They're not down south, which means that the targeting challenge is not as immense as it would be if you went after Western Europe. But it's still a significant challenge. And I think that's where they're headed. They simply want to destroy this nation state, cause it to divide, to fragment. And again, you go back to the intelligence assessments, to the people that have been telling Donald Trump and who told Biden, by the way, Russia is weak. Russia will be easy to defeat. Russia can't withstand the pressure. We're hearing the same kinds of things now about Iran. Now, Iran is not Russia, and Iran has several very serious vulnerabilities. You're familiar with them. Water is a huge problem. Food for the people that live in the country, they are dependent on external deliveries of food. Can the Russians and the Chinese help with those? Perhaps. But I think that's a real danger. The question is, can they do enough damage to the point where somebody stands up and says, enough, we can't take it anymore? Now, what's the Iranian response to this? Well, the Iranian response is that they have no incentive to exercise any restraint. So if they are attacked, their predisposition, Glenn, is to use everything they have. Now, the issue for us is I don't know how effective that will be. I've always said, and I think others agree with this, the Iranians can handle Israel. But can the Iranians handle Israel and the United States in terms of its military power? That is unclear. Now, enormous amounts of weaponry and munitions and missiles and so forth have been delivered over the last few weeks by the Chinese. The Russians have been on the ground and have been working to help with the integrated air and missile defenses. The Chinese, and I presume the Russians as well, but we know without a doubt the Chinese have done this, have provided satellite imagery, real-time feed to the Iranians. So the Iranians are not in a position that they were the last time where they may not know where things are, that they're going to be surprised. I think they know where everything is, and that includes the ships at sea. Now, if you look at the weapons, I don't know how many of these missiles, I think it's the DF-21 or 23 that the Chinese have produced exclusively for the purpose of targeting ships at sea. We haven't seen them used. We don't know how effective they are. But given Iran's performance during the 12-day war, it turned out that their weaponry was actually very, very accurate and very precise. So I think that in addition to firing whatever they've got at Israel, they will very definitely hit our bases, and they will probably go after our ships at sea. What they can affect, obviously, are massive bombing runs right now. Now, we don't know. Perhaps, depending upon the path our bombers take and the altitude, can they be tracked? Well, stealth is something that is not the miracle that most people think of it as being. Stealth, in terms of the design that's built into aircraft, can delay detection, but it can't make you invisible. So you can delay the detection for some period of time. I don't know what that delay looks like. So what we can't address right now is what happens to B-2s that overfly. Can you use B-52s? If you The B-2s have to be very effective against the air and missile defenses, as well as the critical targets, before you can use B-52s. B-52s are wonderful delivery systems for massive numbers of bombs, but they are very vulnerable because they're an old aircraft. They're easy to target and shoot down. So we just don't know. There are a lot of questions we can't answer. I don't know what the answers are that are being provided to Donald Trump, but I suspect that he is being the victim of what I would call the rosy scenario. Then the final point is, how long can this last? And I think 10 days to 2 weeks is about it, because at that point, we are actually scraping the bottom of the barrel for missiles. And that's not a minor issue, because you've got to protect your ships at sea. You've got to protect bases at home. How many missiles can you afford to expend before you're at an unacceptably, dangerously low level, especially if the Chinese and the Russians become involved? And I think that's the final question. Everybody says, what do you think the Chinese and Russians are going to do? And the only answer I can give is that neither China nor Russia will allow Iran to be pulverized out of existence. In other words, if it gets to the point where Iran really is on the ropes and could disintegrate, then Russia and China, I think, will act. Now, what will that action consist of? It won't be nuclear, but it could involve a collision at sea very easily, because both China and Russia have plenty of submarines. And we're not very good at tracking modern nuclear-powered submarines in deep water.